Hello, how you doing? Welcome to Self-Care Shorts. Here we are, doing another one. I'm going to plunge the coffee. Let's plunge the coffee. You like my new hairstyle? Just had it cut. Um, Plunging the coffee. Got to get on with the coffee. My self-care strategy. So we're talking about the latest book at the minute in this little series within a series, and it's this one. Pillars of Success for Social Workers. Yeah, there it is. But remember, we're on Self-Care Shorts here. I've got a thing on me top. We're on Self-Care Shorts here. So this is, I'm generalising what's in the book, really, although this one today is in some ways targeted on social work, but actually targeted on the workplace for many of us, because the unique things, the things that I've referred to in the book as being unique to social work, I think they are to a point, and then after that there are some general points as well. So stay tuned as I kind of work through this next section of the book, because what I'm doing is I'm going through each of the kind of key concepts in the book for you, so that you can get a feel of what's in there. And this one is called Navigating the Emotional Terrain. Navigating the Emotional Terrain. I've said already in a previous one that social work is an emotional labour, as is, for a large part at least, many person-facing jobs in different ways. I mean, I suppose even if you're kind of working in a complaints department somewhere, you are getting the emotions from other people, and that creates emotions in you. And as I've already talked about, emotional regulation is the key to resilience, I firmly believe. So navigating the emotional terrain. So sorry for non-social workers having a listen. I might keep saying social work, but just be honorary social workers for the day. Except don't call yourself one, because to protect the title, in case you haven't to bother. So anyway, I genuinely believe that many things, including social work, medicine, nursing, teaching, all of those kind of things, they're a calling as noble as they are challenging. I think people feel called to be kind of part of the world, be in the part of the world where people get supported and helped. And every day you are witnessing complex human situations involving trauma, loss, pain, emotional pain, as well as physical pain. I work with older people in my social work, and I was often seeing people in a lot of physical pain, which generates emotional pain. So are there unique stresses in social work? Well, as a social worker, I'll probably say yes, they are. Other professions will probably think that the stresses in their professions are unique and different as well. In fact, I've got a good example. I sometimes do talks to teachers, and some of the stuff lands perfectly well. Some of the stuff lands just as well with teachers as it does with social workers. And some of it doesn't, because social workers have, I wouldn't say they have complete control over their diaries, but they've got a lot of autonomy over their diary, over managing how their kind of time kind of pans out across a day. People put meetings in your diary. You might have to go to court on a particular day, that kind of thing. But beyond those kind of mechanisms that operate, where your diary is dictated to you briefly, lots of our diary is under our control. And I think so there are unique stresses in that. And the thing that I've said many times, is that we actually have, we're actually not, it's not an innate quality, being able to manage that aspect of our working lives, but it's highly teachable. And that's the thing that always frustrates me, I suppose, that people don't spend as much time thinking about the mechanics of doing the job, if you like, structuring the job, structuring the workflow, as they do about the face-to-face contact, because they exist in a relationship. If you're not getting the office stuff right, then that creates stress for the office stuff, but also creates stress for the face-to-face work. So it's important we get these right, and we're working in systems. Some of these are systemic challenges, aren't they? It's the way the system works, the reports that need written, the sign-offs, the timescales. So we have to structure this in some way. But on top of that, one of the things, this emotional labour part, is this idea of vicarious trauma, that we, in witnessing the trauma of others, we experience some sort of secondary trauma ourselves. And I think I might have already mentioned this, but several ways to overcome vicarious trauma, several ways to build resilience. They're all connected and linked. Understand your mission. What's your purpose? What gives you meaning? That's a good one. Spending time on your own, reflection, meditation. Spending time with other people, connections, really important. So these things are important things that we need to kind of consider alongside that emotional regulation. If it's an emotional labour, we have to ponder that. And yes, there are kind of systemic challenges, political ideologies that dictate certain things. So it's not all on you, it's part of the system, but the system is handed to us and we have to manage it and deal with it in some way. So very briefly, because I've mentioned these earlier, but it's worth repeating that managing this emotional terrain is down to the things I've already talked about: mindfulness and meditation, physical exercise. I mentioned cold water therapy and the Shakti mat thing, that sort of stuff. But then we get on to some other things. And eudaimonic self-care, which I've talked about in a previous episode. But also, there are some other things that I probably haven't mentioned yet, I don't think. Setting boundaries being one of them. It kind of seems to fly in the face of what I said earlier about the fact that this work-life balance thing is a myth. It is. But that doesn't mean to say that we don't have boundaries. Boundaries between tasks, boundaries between doing life stuff and doing work stuff. We do. Work has to come to an end at some point, and that life has to start. And that sounds like I'm talking about work-life balance. I'm not. It doesn't set work and life off against each other. What it does is, by saying I have to have a boundary here, it says I value the stuff that I do when I'm not at work, because actually it helps me at work. And the stuff that I do at work, in reality, let's be honest, because we get paid, remember, helps me in the home life stuff, in the life stuff that I would call life stuff. So setting boundaries is not about dismissing this idea that this work-life balance thing isn't a good thing. It isn't a good thing, balancing the things up against each other rather than just balancing life is thing. But so boundaries are still important. Boundaries where you say, hang on a minute, it's 12:30. I need a boundary here where it says I get my lunch break. Whatever's going on. You have to. It's essential. One of the things I said about vicarious trauma that helps it is time with other people. So reflective supervision and peer support. Talking to your colleagues, talking to your mates. Really important. And I suppose years ago I probably thought when people were chatting on at work that meant it wasn't a good thing and they weren't getting work done. But I don't think I thought that in a strong kind of way. But probably thought it a little bit, if I'm being honest. But I accept and understand completely, because the literature talks about that peer support, those chats over the kettle, those 10-15 minute breaks with a colleague, just decompressing before you get back into the work, are really important. So it's really important, that reflective supervision. Supportive management. One of the interesting things in the research on burnout in the workplace is one of the things that does mitigate it is good reflective supervision through good reflective management. And that's the thing that managers can do for their staff, is provide that decompressed space. That needs you as a manager to be in control of what you're doing, though, because you can't offer that space if you're up a height as well, can you? So it's important that you do all this stuff as well. So there's that. And the other thing that I think is really important, because it adds to this idea of meaning and purpose, is I think as social workers, and I point the finger at myself here as well, is we're not active enough as advocates in the systems that we're in terms of the political landscape, in terms of how things are done. We should be pushing for more manageable caseloads. We should be pushing for better resources. We should be pushing for policies that prioritise our well-being as practitioners. And that gets lost sometimes because we push for the service users, the clients, the families, the children. And that's fine. That's rightly so. We should be doing that. But we also need to advocate in some ways. And I know the majority of social workers that do this, and this is a little problematic, possibly, but it fits with eudaimonic self-care, do it outside of their daily work. So that's a tough one, isn't it? That's a tough one. But, you know, most people who I know who are politically minded, politically involved, do it outside of work. But they still do it. They still do it, and they still enjoy doing it. They get pleasure and delight out of doing it because it fits with what gives them purpose and meaning. And when something gives you purpose and meaning, it becomes less of a chore and more of a mission. And the mission kind of fuels you. Do you know what I mean? So it's important to try and balance all of that up. Because the reality of social work practice, sorry to anybody who's not a social worker in the room right now, it's the same in other professions, though I just don't know what the stats are. One particular study found that 53% of social workers felt burnt out at some point in their career. So more than half. And that didn't matter how old they were, what experience they'd had, accounting for those things. Or those things didn't have any influence. So people who have been in the career a long time can experience burnout. And I talk to a lot of people in their assessed and supported unemployment. They also feel burnout as well. And I think I've mentioned this before, but there's also some research that shows that people with a high degree of enthusiasm for the job, which is often seen in social work and teaching and medicine, are at greater risk of burnout. So the more enthusiastic you are, the more risk of burnout, maybe a consequence of enthusiasm, I suppose, leading to going beyond. So we have to be careful. That's where the boundary thing is really important. Students who newly qualified social workers, feel ready to promote and enable soft skill. Maybe something you'd expect social workers to be able to do. Advocate, inform, get people to articulate what they're after. But only 32% felt prepared to intervene and provide. And that's because that's an instrumental aspect of the role, isn't it? That's how do I get a service for this person? What can I provide? What can I offer? That kind of thing. So they're competent at conducting assessments, building relationships, communication, but feel overwhelmed by those instrumental demands, managing the caseload, writing the reports, navigating systems of accountability and sign off, but navigating systems and getting things for people, referral forms to other agencies, referral for services, that kind of thing. And interestingly, going back to giving yourself meaning and purpose, those second things, the writing the reports, the accountability systems, the report writing, they're part of the how of the job. The why of the job sits in the communication with individuals, undertaking the assessment, building the relationships. That's rooted in why. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I want to support and help people. How do I do it? I'll write a report. I get it signed off, And what we know, don't we already, is that if you root yourself in why, purpose and meaning, rather than how, the instrumental aspects of the job, you're less likely to burn out. Really important. The other things that again I don't think are particular to social work, but it's the social work research I've read, and it links with that how and why. One of them is role conflict. You end up doing the job that you didn't come into the profession to do because it's all about the paperwork and not about the people. I know it isn't. But if you look at the stats, people spend more time writing things about people than spend time with people. So that creates a bit of a schism, that creates a bit of an existential crisis. What am I? What is social worker? So that role conflict doesn't help us. And what happens is then people spend the time with the people and then do the office stuff, the writing of the reports, that kind of thing. I'm going to use the word paperwork. We all know what I mean. There's no paper, but you know what I mean. All the paperwork, they do that, and that's the stuff that runs into the evening or runs into the weekends because they're not going to diminish the time with the people. So that role conflict creates tension. Also role ambiguity, not quite knowing whether this is my thing to do. SYE's talk about this a lot. To me, they talk about kind of, especially since we started working from home a lot, well, I ended up doing all these things this year, and then when I got into the office and somebody heard me doing these things, they were like, what are you doing that for? That's not your thing to do. The housing officer does that, or the district nurse does that, or the health visitor does that. That it's not your thing to do. Oh, well, wasn't sure, so I just did it, And so when your role is ambiguous like that, so I think we've got a role here as managers and organisations to try and clearly define the role. Now, I know that's difficult. It's really difficult with social work, but where does the role end? Where does the role start, broadly speaking? Because that role ambiguity means people spend precious amounts of mental resources trying to figure out whether this is their thing to do or not, instead of just doing things, So we've got that. We've talked a bit about the role of empathy. I suppose we've kind of talked about that in other places. We've talked a little bit about that. Empathy is the cornerstone of social work. Empathy and communication. They're the cornerstones of social work practice. Although my mate Phil would probably tell me for them to be cornerstones, I need 4 of them. Because cornerstones are the things in corners of buildings. We'll have a one-sided building with 2 corners. So the cornerstones, so empathy and communication anyway, really important. And then we've got the kind of, I call them organisational stresses. That means makes it sound as though it's to do with the organisation. I mean being organised when I often talk about that. Although organisational pressures like hot desking and agile working and whatever we call it now also bring stresses with them. So what's important? What's the takeaway here? The takeaway here is that stress in social work and other professions is not a byproduct of personal weakness. It's not a byproduct of personal weakness, but it's a systemic challenge because of the nature of the work, not because of the systems necessarily, like the sign-offs and the reports, but that as well. But the nature of the work, the systemic nature of the work, means that stress gets transferred from individuals, be that service users, families, etc., or colleagues. That stress gets transferred to us, and then we package it up into our suitcase of stress and we take it home and we unpack it for our family to see. So it's not a byproduct of personal weakness. However, there are things we can do on a personal level, which are the things we've been talking about, and I will continue to talk about. There are things on a personal level that we can do to offset, to compensate for the challenges of the job, because those challenges exist. In some ways, some of them because of the nature of the job. The nature of the job is you go out and talk to people who are going through traumatic experiences or who have gone through traumatic experiences. That's the nature of the job. The nature of the job is we have to write about people in order to justify things. That's the nature of the job. Now, yeah, caseloads could be lower, resources could be more significant, but some of those things are not going to disappear, even if those things were to disappear. The the secondary trauma, the vicarious trauma, is not going to disappear if suddenly there were more social workers. Now, it might be easier to manage because we might get more time for good quality reflective supervision. So it's complex, but there are things we can do, and we've talked about those in other places, and I talk about those in the books I've written and on this very YouTube channel. So there you go. We need to integrate these strategies into our practice and not see them as a reactive measure when things have started to go wrong in terms of our well-being. And we'll leave that there. So there you are. Complex. It's a complex area, but it's not personal weakness. It's about the job. It's about the role. It's about the environment we do it in. But there are things we can do, strategies we can undertake. Take care. Look forward to talking to you very soon.